All right, guys. So if you look at muscles, like, remove the skin, you're just kind of looking at a diagram on muscles. It's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of things going on, a lot of crisscross applesauce. And although in our normal kind of lexicon, we know, bicep, tricep, there's a lot of nuanced muscles that aren't just kind of the standard, the back muscles, the glutes, the quads, the hams, the core, there's a lot of nuance. And especially for those of you that are going into personal training, athletic training, physical therapy, these nuanced muscles are going to be important. They may be a limiting factor to performance. These little muscles that don't really get talked a lot about might be the one that needs to be corrected for various reasons. So we have to go deeper than just the quads, the core, the hams, the glutes, the back, the shoulders, the delts. This picture, I think, is a good illustration, though, of like all this crisscross applesauce. Sometimes it's really hard to know what these secondary, tertiary muscles do, because sometimes it's not very clear. And traditionally, some people, or at least when I was in school, they would say, well, if you know the origin and the insertion, then you know what it does. And that's not true a lot of times. Like we have a muscle at our hip that starts in the front and inserts in the front, but it pulls your knee to the back. Just saying, it doesn't always, it's not always nice and clean because of nuances and angles and things like that. So how many muscles in the body? A lot of skeletal muscles. How many joint motions? A lot. How many different contractions? 3, we know that, right? Isometric, eccentric, concentric. So my point is, with this little diagram, is that's a lot of variables. My flexors, remember from 310, my flexors can be responsible for extension if they're working eccentrically. My extensors can do flexion if they're working eccentric. My extensors can do extension concentrically. My flexors can be responsible for no motion if they're working isometric. Just a lot of different variables. And that's just for elbow. Okay? That, in my 20 years of doing this, is where our students, and not just our students, our professors and our clinicians struggle the most, not with the stuff that it's easy to memorize. It's easy to memorize geography. What's the capital of this state? The context of the contractions is where we struggle because it's nuanced. It's something you can't necessarily memorize because sometimes flexors do extension when they're working eccentrically. Sometimes extensors do flexion. So we have to be able to recognize the agonist, the motion, thus the contraction. Remember that from 310? The part of biomechanics is the biomechanics of skeletal muscles. We're going to put in specific muscles to those groups. So now the elbow flexors will have names to those. Now, think of all of the agonists as teams. The Bulls, the Pelicans, the Wizards, the Chiefs, Eagles. And all we're saying is that, all right, in this group, the elbow flexors, it's a team, here are the major players on that team. Jalen Hurts is a biceps breakup, and Saquon Barkley is going to be the brachialis, and this player is very versatile. He could play, he's a returner. It's Cooper DeJean is the brachioradialis. He can do a lot of different things. But they're still part of the team, but they're individual players on that team. Okay? So one thing you've heard me say a lot in 310, we can't associate specific muscles with specific joint motions. And unfortunately, we see that a lot in the literature. And it's not that the literature is wrong, they just don't give you context. They'll say the bicep flexes the elbow, or they'll say bicep elbow flexion. There's no context there. It's not to say the bicep can't, but it doesn't always have to. I can have flexion because of tricep. I don't have to have any motion and yet still my bicep. In other words, there's no context of contraction because that's nuanced and that's more difficult than just saying, here's the capital of this state to memorize. Okay. So some terms you'll see in the literature is action and like muscle action. And again, it's a term that most biomechanists of today we don't particularly like because it infers that there's motion. And of the three types of contractions, it's kind of funny if you think of it. The biceps, if you say the biceps brachii does elbow flexion, that only happens one in the three different options it could do. Isometric, it's not going to have flexion, and eccentrically, it's not going to have flexion. It's only one out of three will that muscle do that motion. So we use a term, instead of action, we like to use the term function, which I put here. So here's an example of a traditional, you might find this in a book, you might find this in online. But the biceps brachii, there's the origin, there's the insertion, and then you'll see an action. And again, just tell me if this kind of makes sense. Supinates forearm. Well, it can if it's working concentrically, but it doesn't have to. I mean, I can have pronation with it eccentrically, or I can have no motion with it working isometrically. Or does that make sense? So the actual action, the motion, is not what that muscle does. That muscle pulls in directions of motion, but it doesn't necessarily cause a specific motion. So what we're going to do is just tweak it a little bit. We're going to say instead of an action, we're going to say a function. What's its function? What's its purpose? A firefighter's function is to attempt to put out the fire. But they don't put out every fire, unfortunately. But they try. You could either put out the fire while trying to put out the fire, or you can not put out the fire while trying to put out the fire. The firefighter's function is to try to do it. A muscle's function is to pull in a specific direction of motion. So the biceps at the elbow is a flexion puller. It just may not always cause flexion because it depends on the contraction. But it will always pull that way. Gravity always pulls down, but that doesn't mean it's always making everything fall down. Does that make sense? So for our class, we need to look at function, direction of pull. The biceps brachii is an elbow flexion puller or an elbow flexor, meaning it pulls in the direction of flexion. And this concept is true regardless of the contraction. Think of this analogy, guys, that I used in 310. When I told you the elevator analogy, the elevator is called an elevator not because it always brings you up. It's got to bring you down too, right? But the elevator cable always pulls up. It always pulls in a direction of elevation. Pulling up to bring you up, concentric. Pulling up to keep you from falling down while you get off, isometric. Pulling up to slowly let you down safely, eccentric. But in all three cases, it was the direction of the pull that was consistent, not the motion. Does that make sense? So that example is why we can't look at muscles specifically with motions, but we can look at muscles based off of pull, function, purpose. The biceps pulls in a direction of flexion, whether it's working, whether you're at rest, whether you're sleeping, whether you die. But it doesn't mean it's always going to cause that motion. Again, gravity is pulling down on all of our water bottles. That doesn't mean it's making it go down. But it's pulling that way all the time. Okay? Function. How does it pull? So here's an example of what I just told you guys. Consider the following. Everybody knows the biceps. Biceps, elbow flexion. So the biceps does flexion, but remember, we have to have context. Biceps or the flexors do flexion through concentrics, right? Biceps, extension through eccentrics. Biceps holds the position isometric. So from left to right, we had the bicep and his teammates working concentrically. But if you just went off of muscle and motion, some students say, guys, it happens. This is why I had to evolve my lectures. Some students will say, well, this must be tricep. But you know darn well you're not working your tricep, you're still working your bicep. But what they do is they say, oh, I had extension and the tricep does extension. You see what I'm trying to tell you? They say, well, I have elbow extension and this book says tricep does elbow extension. Because they don't have the nuance. You know you're working your bicep in both, right? And I taught you in 310 concentric, eccentric. So in other words, we cannot talk about muscles, motion without having context of contraction. The context of that contraction is what ties it all together. That's the bow that finishes the present. So what we can't do, we can't say flexion, bicep, extension, tricep. That's basically what I'm trying to get to. All right, here's another one. If I ask the test, I swear to goodness, 30 to 40% of students is going to be bicep. And the reason they're going to go bicep is because, well, wait, this book says bicep does flexion. The online, I Googled it. It said biceps does elbow flexion. You hear the sermon I'm trying to preach to you? External force trying to do what? Flexion. Why in the world would I need my bicep if I already have the dumbbell trying to flex me? I need my extensors because the dumbbell's trying to flex me. I observe flexion. Extensors do flexion through eccentrics. But I definitely don't need the bicep. I slam the weight into my neck. But in an age of memorization, it's easier to say, I just want to know what the capital of this state is, because there's no context with that. But with muscles and motion, we have to have the context of contraction. All right. So why do so many resources state that the action of specific muscles is a specific motion? Because it's convenient to teach and easy to memorize. It's the truth. Why should we learn about muscles and motion with the context of contraction? Because it's reality. Because that's what's happening. And that's why so many people struggle with it, because they've never had it taught to them. Okay. All right. I'm walking you down a path, guys. Work is force and distance, high school physics. All I'm basically doing is showing you that A plus B is equal to C from 310, agonist, joint motion is contraction is similar to that. It's a work equation. It's force, motion, work. What do you think I use work and contraction synonymously in 310? Remember in 310, we figured out what group of muscles is working because we asked ourselves why. What's our agonist? Once we figured out our agonist and we said what motion did we observe. And then when we had those two pieces of information, contraction was solved for us. A, B, and C. Here's an example. Let's pretend this is a barbell. I'm going to say pretend, I mean this is light, but let's say it's something realistic, like 225 pounds. All right, 25 pounds. External forces trying to do what to my elbows? Extend me. I don't need extensors, I need flexors. That's A. I need my flexion pullers. What's my motion? Extension. Flexors do extension through eccentrics. All we're going to do next is, who are the flexors? And I'm going to teach you how to see those, how to recount those, how to visualize those, so you don't miss anybody. But the flexors are more than the bicep. Bicep gets all the love. Like, look, Jalen Hurts had a great game, but do y'all think Jalen Hurts was the MVP last night? I wish they'd have given it to the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense is falling. But somebody's got to be the star. So one of the things too that I keep saying is that if all we do is say bicep, 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 tricep, 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 hamstring, 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 there's all these other players on those teams that never get recognized. And we need to know what those players do so that you know how to rehab them or how to stretch them or how to work them. Because if all we ever hear are hamstrings, quads, glutes, you better hope that every one of your problems is a hamstring glute. Does that kind of make sense? The analogy I heard is if all you do is carry around a hammer in your toolkit, you better hope that every problem you ever had is a nail. All right. Guys, look at this. I painstakingly made this. I hope this makes sense, but this is literally summarizing 310, right? Gravity's trying to extend you. You need flexors. You observe flexion, it's concentric. Gravity's trying to extend you. You need flexors. You observe extension, it's eccentric. Gravity's trying to extend you. You need flexors. If you don't change any position, it's isometric. It's all types of work. And remember, isometric may not have mechanical work, but it has physiological work. There's movement happening inside the muscle. There's ATP and all that fancy Harry Potter physiology enzyme stuff. There's movement in the factory itself. You can't hold that position forever. You're going to get tired because there's physiological work. So this is the magic of this class, guys. For a muscle to function at a joint, wrist, elbow, shoulder, cervical, for us, our first one is going to be the cervical. Two things have to happen. One is it has to cross that joint. It has to go from one bone, cross a border, and attach to another bone. Meaning, if I had a string that went from my shoulder and stopped on my humerus, there's no way I can pull my elbow in a direction of flexion or extension because it has to cross into the forearm. Simple as that. For a muscle to function at a joint, it has to cross the joint. The specific function of the muscle. So in other words, the first one is just yes or no. Does it or doesn't it? The bicep functions at the elbow because it crosses the elbow. The more nuanced question is, how does it cross? Where does it cross? I'm going to use the elbow as an example because we know bicep and tricep. But the bicep crosses the elbow anteriorly, thus it's a flexion puller. The tricep crosses the elbow posteriorly, thus it's an extension puller. But if I took the bicep in surgery, detached it, wrapped it around, and crossed the elbow in the back, this muscle, even though it still has the same origin, would be an extension puller. Because it's how you cross. No different if this door had two functions. That could be a door closer or a door opener based off of my pull. Whether or not I'm a closed puller or an open puller is where I cross. Am I on the inside? I'm a closed puller. Am I on the outside? I'm an open puller. It's that simple. Does it cross? How does it cross? For our cervical, we're going to get to it today. Super simple. Anterior crossing muscles are going to be flexion pullers. Posterior crossing muscles are going to be extension pullers. Muscles that pull on the right side of the Adam's apple, the AP axis, are going to be right lateral bending pullers. Left lateral bending pullers. The harder ones are the transverse. We're going to get to those last. But it's that simple. How does it cross? Your knee extensors cross the knee anteriorly, and your knee flexors cross the knee posteriorly. You're going to see a muscle when we get to the hip called the sartorius. It literally runs its life 95% in the front of the thigh, and then right when it gets to the knee, it crosses in the back. Crosses posteriorly, and then comes up and inserts in the front. Guess what? That's a knee flexor because it crosses the knee in the back. It's all about the crossing. How do these muscles cross the joints for their function? Okay? So, origins, insertions, are those things important? Some of you. But that's geography. Do nurses memorize every medicine there is? No, they have a physician desk reference. The most important thing for all of my students, because we have a variety of interests. Some of you are going to go to grad school, some of you are not. What do muscles do? How do they work? And what they do and how they work has nothing to do with their origin and insertion. It's how do they cross the joint. So that's what I'm going to emphasize to you guys. Function of muscle based off of how they cross. Very visual. Very visual. All right. Check this out. If you were to reminisce, let's say you're at a class reunion and you're talking about like students who were in like your kindergarten class, first grade class, second grade class. You probably wouldn't name people for your homeroom class, high school. You wouldn't name people based off of a memorized list. You'd probably say, who sat in front of me? Who sat to the left of me? Who sat to the right of me? Or heck, even in this class, you can kind of get a visual. Who's on the right side of class, left side of class. Our brains do real well with spatial awareness. Okay? Our cross-sectional anatomy is just that. We are going to look at every major joint in the body. The cervical, the trunk, the hip, the knee, the ankle, subtalar, the wrist. And every joint is somewhat circular. Somewhat circular. And not only that, but all three of our axes can be visualized within that circle. The blue is the anterior posterior. The red is bilateral. And the green is the polar. Now, let me give some nuance here. If you have a tablet that's laying on the table, so if you have a tablet that's laying on the table, the cross section is literally what you see right there on the table. Anterior, posterior, bilateral, polar. I couldn't teach you if my tablet was on the table because we couldn't see it. So what do I have to do? I have to rotate it to show you on this screen. Yeah? So in other words, on your tablet laying on the ground, let's say this is Ken's neck. Anterior, posterior axis, bilateral axis, polar axis. All we're doing is we're taking Ken and rotating him so that everybody can see on the board. Polar axis for Ken, anterior, posterior, bilateral. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Because if I took it and did this, we all couldn't see it on the board. But you need to be aware because some people will look at it on their table and it's literally like this, polar, bilateral, AP. But on the board, it's going to be like this, polar, bilateral, AP. Any questions? Okay, now we could say, hey, every joint that we have is like a classroom. students. For every joint, we have muscles. And some of those students sit in the front of class. Some sit in the back of class. Some sit on the right side. Some sit on the left side. So we have a joint that has a front of the class, back of the class, right side, left side. And I always hated school. So my favorite class, I'd always say, was recess. Finally get to go out and run around. The polar axis is recess. The polar axis is our merry-go-round. We get to go play on the merry-go-round. This will make sense, I promise you. I'm going to show you how much you already know just with life data. If my neck, my cervical vertebra, was represented here, I know that flexion and extension happens about my bilateral axis, right? I know that right and left lateral cervical bending happen about my anterior posterior axis. And I know that right and left transverse cervical rotation happen about my polar axis. True? Okay. Let's start with sagittal plane bilateral axis. Wouldn't it make sense that any muscles, any students in my neck class that sit in the front of class anteriorly, and muscles only do what? Muscles only pull. Any muscles that sit in the front of class are flexion pullers, because they have moment, they have torque, because they cross the cervical in the front. Any muscles that are in the back, sit in the back of class, are going to be extension pullers, because they sit in the back. So we're going to have, for the cervical, we're going to have flexion pullers or flexors that cross the neck anteriorly. We're going to have extensors or extension pullers that cross the neck posteriorly. One's in the back. The students that sit on the right side of class are going to be right lateral benders, trying to pull right ear to right shoulder. And the students that are going to sit on the left side of class are going to be left lateral pullers. And then when we go to PE, with the transverse, I'm going to show you how the students are trying to play on the merry-go-round. How some students are trying to spin the merry-go-round this way or spin the merry-go-round that way. And if this is kin, if the students are trying to spin the merry-go-round this way, wouldn't that be right transverse cervical rotation pullers? And if students are trying to spin the merry-go-round that way, wouldn't it be left transverse pullers? That's it. And I'm going to use rotation arrows to show you how they're trying to pull transverse. Let's check for understanding real quick. One. All right, guys. I have a joint. Doesn't matter what it is. Bilateral. There's the front of class. Oh gosh, my dyslexia. And there's the front of class. Back of class. There's the right side. There's the left side. I'm going to specifically make this my cervical because that's our first one. And also, my neck and my trunk literally have a right side and left side. You can get into wrist and elbow. That's why you have the words lateral and medial, because it's the side of the side. So let's say this is my neck. You want it? All right. My bilateral axis separates muscles that are flexion pullers from extension pullers. My AP axis separates muscles that are right lateral from left lateral pullers. going to depend on the rotation of whether they're trying to spin the merry-go-round right transversely or left transversely. So watch what I'm going to do. Muscles 1 and 2, as this is just checking for understanding. We're going to put in muscles in there. I'm going to show them to you. Muscles 1 and 2, whatever they are, those are cervical flexors because they cross the neck in the front. Muscles only pull, so they pull in a direction of flexion. That does not mean they're always going to cause flexion. They could be working isometrically with no motion. They could be working eccentrically and do extension through eccentrics, but they will always and forever pull in a direction of flexion because of how they cross the neck. Because they cross the neck in the front. 3 and 4 are cervical extensors because they cross the neck in the back. Which two muscles are my right lateral cervical benders? Outstanding, because they're on the right side. Which two muscles are my left lateral? 1 and 3. Watch this. If I say, hey, muscle number 2, you're going to try to spin the merry-go-round this way. There's the merry-go-round, and muscle number 2 is trying to spin the merry-go-round this way. Can you see how muscle number 2 would be a left transverse cervical rotation puller? It's trying to spin the merry-go-round to the left. You see it? It doesn't matter in terms of transverse, it doesn't matter where I'm at around the merry-go-round, because I could try to spin it this way, whether I'm on this side or this side. The spin, it doesn't matter where. What matters is how am I trying to spin it rotationally. Muscle number 3 would be trying to rotate the cervical the exact same way as muscle number 2 at the merry-go-round. You see that? 3 and 2 may not have the same sagittal pull. 3 and 2 may not have the same frontal pull, but when they go to recess, they are down to spin the merry-go-round the exact same way. Does that make sense? Think of it like this, guys. If you had a basketball and you were trying to effectively, spin the basketball, wouldn't it make sense you want one hand on the front and the right side, maybe the other on the back and the left side so that you can give it a good twist? You wouldn't want both hands on one side. You wouldn't want both hands in the front. You'd want one front right and one back left to really torque it, to really twist it. I'm going to show you how our cervical muscles have that. You have one in the front and one in the back, and rotationally, they have the same rotational spin. It's going to be cool. Bilateral, anterior, posterior, and fold. So let's look at this. So if you open up your PDF, major muscles that function at the cervical vertebra. You ever heard of the term prime movers, right? This class, there's always next level stuff. You could always go further down the rabbit hole, okay? My job isn't to take you all the way down the rabbit hole. I'm still going down the rabbit hole. My job is to get you to a point where in grad school or in life, you're able to continue down the rabbit hole with the understanding that I give you. So although we're going to be learning a lot of muscles, there are still more muscles. They may not be the prime movers. I'm gonna make sure you know all the all-stars. But eventually it is going to be important to know the 11th string person off the bench, because one day that 11th string muscle off the bench might have a problem that you might need to fix. Okay. But again, I got 3 months with you. So for your cervical, we're going to have 4 people in this class. It's a small class. We're going to have 4 students, 4 muscles. They're listed right here. This is all on Moodle for you guys. You have your right and your left sternocleidomastoid. Some muscles are named by origin and insertion. This is an example. Sternum, cleidoclavicle mastoid process, sternocleidomastoid. Some muscles have Latin, I think I did this on the first day of class, have Latin origins, soleus, sartorius, gracilis, that's all Latin meaning. And then some muscles have function in the name. Those are my favorites. The supinator, the adductor longus and brevis. Like, I love those muscles that have pull in their name. Pronator teres, pronator quadratus, love them. Wish they were all like that. So right and left sternocleidomastoid and right and left erector spinae. Guys, your erector spinae has a lot of little muscles in it. Longissimus, iliocastalis, spinalis, then you have all these little intrinsic little rotaries. It makes sense. For you to be able to erect your spine all day, you better have a lot of help keeping it up. Try to hold your shoulders out with just your deltoid. You're going to get tired. So it makes sense. You got to have a lot of help to keep that building upright. But those muscles do not cross the spine. In other words, the right-sided erectors stay on the right side of the spine and the left stay on the left. So we're grouping them into the left erector and the right erector. And in grad school, you could go down the rabbit hole more and learn about those individual muscles. So that's it. You have 4 muscles to start off with so that we can get the hang of it. 310. Who did I teach you would be working if you pushed behind your neck and you kept your head still? What group would I be working if the external force is trying to flex me? Extensors. My cross-sectional approach will say, okay, I'm working extensors. Extensors cross posteriorly. Extensors are crossed behind the bilateral axis. Who are those muscles that sit in that side of class? Left and right erector spinae. This didn't tell you who's working. 310 told you who's working. This helps to remind you who's in the class. What about this one? He's trying to push his head back. Flexors or extensors? Flexors. Flexors sit in the front of class. They pull in a direction of flexion, meaning they cross the neck anteriorly in the front. Who are the cervical flexors, the muscles that cross in the front? Left and right sternocleidomastoid. Again, I'm going to show you the muscles. I'm introducing you to the cross-sectional approach to learning muscle function. Right or left laterals? He's trying to push his right ear to his right shoulder. So which muscles do I need to recruit? Left laterals. Well, who pulls to the left laterals? The ones on the left side of class? I mean, it's that simple. Who's on the left side of class? The left sterno and the left erector? They're on the left side of class. He's trying to push to the left. I need muscles that pull to the right. I need the ones on the right side of class. Who's on the right side of class? Right sterno, right erector. Again, on Wednesday, I'm going to restart this lecture from here, and I'm going to show you all of these muscles. I'm going to show you where they start. I'm going to show you where they go. But more important than all that, I'm going to show you how they cross, and thus how they pull. Another important thing that we're going to have to learn eventually is not just what's a muscle's functions. Wow. Again, haven't even showed you the muscle yet, but you already know so much. The right sternocleidomastoid, based on how it sits in class, based on how it crosses, you probably know, oh, it must be a cervical flexor, a right lateral cervical bender, and a left transverse cervical rotation puller. And you know all that, not because you memorized a bunch of lists, but you could just literally see how it sits in class. It pulls this way, and this way. The left erector spinae pulls this way, and this way. And I'm going to teach you, I'm going to show you the muscles, and I'm going to teach you how the right sterno is actually trying to make you look to your left, because it's like when you were in trouble and your mom grabbed your right ear, then twist your head to the left. At least my mom did. Or if she grabbed the back of my ear and pulled this way, the back would want to make me look to the left. So we got an ear being pulled forward and an ear being pulled right to back, and they're both trying to make me spin the same. That's what's happening there and there. Another thing why this is so important, stretching muscles, guys. What if you're in therapy and someone has a problem with a specific muscle? Like let's say they have a contracture, they're tight on their right sternocleidomastoid. The MRI shows you need to know how that muscle pulls so that you know how to position it to stretch it. So the right sternocleidomastoid is a flexion puller, so I need to extend. It's a right lateral puller, so I need to bend to the left. It's a left transverse puller, so I need to look to the right. I'm going to explain that because that's weird. Your instinct is like, how in the world can something on my right side want to pull me to the left? It's a little weird. We're going to work that out. But the point is, with one cross-sectional circle, where do the major muscles of the neck sit in class? We can answer thousands of questions. Who are the cervical flexors? The left and right sternocleidomastoid. Who are the cervical extensors? Left and right erector spinae. Who are the right lateral cervical benders? The right sternocleidomastoid, right erector spinae. Who's the left lateral benders? Left sternocleidomastoid, left erector spinae. Who are the right transverse cervical rotators? Left sternocleidomastoid, right erector spinae. Who are the left transverse? Right sternocleidomastoid, left erector spinae. What does the left sternocleidomastoid do on its own? How does it pull? It's a cervical flexor, it's a left lateral cervical bender, it's a right transverse cervical rotator. All of that was just me seeing these four things in that circle that represents the neck and how those muscles pull. Very powerful. Now, I did not teach you all of this yet. I'm giving you a prep of what's coming on Wednesday. I'm going to show you every muscle in different dimensions. That's another thing that's tough, is a lot of times when you've been introduced to these muscles, it's only through one visual. These muscles have 3 dimensions of pull. And a lot of times we're limited to 2-dimensional pictures or 3-dimensional concepts. I'll give you an example of that. So if all I did was show you this picture here, it'd be kind of hard to tell that those muscles cross the anterior. Easy to see frontal, right ear, right shoulder, left ear, left shoulder, but you need different views. Oh, now I can see how it has an anterior pull. You need different views to see the different pulls sometimes. And that's what I'm going to give you. Different views to make sure we see the different functions of the muscle. Last thing I will say, I just want right answers. I will never, these circles, the cross-sectional circles, I can give you tons of feedback. I saw a former student 10 years ago at a charity event, and she was like, thank you for the circles. I teach them to my students. But that doesn't mean you have to use them. They are a tool. They're a tool for mostly visual learners. On the test, I am not going to ask you to draw a circle, because that's memorization. But you know what I'm going to ask you? What's the function of the left sternocleidomastoid? What muscles am I working in this exercise? Gravity's trying to do this. I need muscles that do this. Who are those muscles? You look to the right. Which muscles made you look to the right? Okay, nothing's trying to make me look to the right. I had to use right transverse cervical rotators, concentric contraction, left sternocleidomastoid, right erector spinal. I don't care how you do it. Some people do lists. That's okay, but think about it. If you do lists, you're going to have to write twice as much information. Because I got 5 minutes, guys. I'm sorry. I'm on a roll. I'm preaching today. Look, the left sternocleidomastoid is sometimes on the same pickup team as the right sternocleidomastoid. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they could be on the same team as this. Sometimes they could be on the same team. So if you did lists, that could be very confusing, because you have, well, this one works with this one here, but it works with another one there. It works with a different one here. But if all you did was just see it, and on the test, I'm going to give you scratch paper. And the first thing most students do with their scratch paper is draw your class. It gives you all the answers. Circle, bilateral, AP, polar, left, right, rotation, 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 rotation. Be ready to answer any and all questions that involve muscle function. The intent of this class is to truly develop the art of understanding muscles influence motion through contraction. And how muscles influence motion is not about the origin, and it's not about the insertion. How does it cross the joint? We good? All right, guys, yeah, good. I felt like I was preaching today.